All right. Hello, everyone. Oops, I didn't mean to move off that screen so quickly. Thanks for joining us today. I think I will get us started on time. I'm Marlena Byrne. I'm the Deputy Chief Resilience Officer for the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency. We're a division of the Department of Public Safety. And welcome to our webinar today. We are doing a series called Spotlight on Resilience, where we're highlighting different resilience topics. We've already had a few on issues like funding, and we will be having more. But this one today is on green infrastructure and nature-based solutions. And we have a great lineup of panelists for you today. I'm going to go over the agenda really quickly and go through a few housekeeping measures before we get started. As you can see, today's webinar is being recorded, so just FYI for all of you. We're going to do a Q&A at the very end following the presentations from all the panelists, but you can put your questions in the chat at any time. Just on a rolling basis, we'll be keeping track of them, and we will get to them when we open up our Q&A session. During the Q&A session, if you'd like to actually speak and talk for your question, you can just raise your hand, the little hand up button, and we will call on you. But otherwise, we ask that you do keep your microphone muted when you're not asking a question. And on that note, I will be probably muting myself periodically because I'm at the very end of a cold. So I keep coughing and I don't want to do that in all of your ears. So my apologies for that in advance. So we did unfortunately have one of our speakers have to drop out for some personal scheduling reasons today, but we still have a great lineup of three panelists. Kicking off will be Stephen Jeltima from the City of Raleigh Stormwater Division. He will be presenting on the Raleigh Rainwater Rewards Program, which is a cost-sharing mechanism that the City of Raleigh uses to encourage private property owners to include green infrastructure and nature-based solutions into their stormwater on-site infrastructure. Then we'll have Heather Fisher from the town of Hillsborough, also with their stormwater team. She's going to be presenting on a great project that they installed a couple of years ago now, I think. She'll correct me on that though if I'm wrong, in partnership with Habitat for Humanity to address some ongoing stormwater issues they were having in one part of their community. And then finally, excuse me, we will have Terry DeMeo speaking. She is here with us from the USS North Carolina Battleship Memorial, and she will be talking about the things that they've been doing to manage not only obviously stormwater issues there, that's a common theme among our panel, but also specifically, they're obviously on the coast, they're down in Wilmington, as probably most of you know, and they've got sea level rise and other tidal issues that they're dealing with there. So those are our panelists, and I'm going to take us off that, and we're going to jump right into Stephen's presentation, and I will mute myself. And Stephen, take it away, please. Oh, actually, no, don't take it away because I'm supposed to introduce you. So I apologize for that. Let me introduce you, Stephen. So Stephen Jeltima is an interdisciplinary environmental scientist and technical professional with 17 cumulative years of experience as an engineer with the City of Raleigh and past engineering consulting firms. His primary areas of expertise include water resources, hydrology, technical monitoring, and NPDES, permit compliance. As part of the Water Quality Division of the City of Raleigh, Stephen supports permit compliance for the city. He serves as the point lead for all total maximum daily load TMDL requirements, which is requirements under our Clean Water Act, identified by the state and EPA while supporting various initiatives and special studies. Stephen will be presenting today on the Raleigh Rainwater Rewards Program that serves as a successful cost-sharing mechanism for the City of Raleigh to encourage and guide property owners, private, public, and institutional owners to implement stormwater controls within their property boundaries to improve water quality of stormwater runoff. All right, and with that, Stephen, thank you so much, and please take it away.
Thank you, Marlena, and thank you, Nicole. Appreciate the opportunity. Let me know if you can hear me. I get that passed first.
We can hear you great.
Great. All right. So as an introduction was laid out, I work for the City of Raleigh as an engineer. part of the water quality division. And we wear all sorts of hats and do all sorts of programs and initiatives. And one of those that really touches on resiliency and utilizing our utility fund that we have set up through stormwater is this unique program called Raleigh Rainwater Rewards. So advance.
Stephen, I think you might have muted yourself accidentally.
Whoops, sorry about that.
So you might have to start at the beginning of this slide again.
That's fine. Yeah. So what is Raleigh Rainwater Rewards? As I described a little bit earlier, it's a unique incentive program that utilizes about 1% of Raleigh's stormwater utility fee to facilitate, this is key, voluntary installations of water quality improvement projects on public and private properties throughout the city of Raleigh. Essentially, it's a cost share mechanism that we have set up and had approved through City Council that can improve up to 75 to 90% of project costs through the city, and then that property owner will incur the other cost share, be it 25 to 10%. Some of these project types, which I will delve into more detail, include green roofs, cisterns, silva cells, bioretention or rain gardens, permeable pavement, or and impervious surface removal. So quite a range that some of you might be very familiar with. The most common of those that we support are rain gardens and cisterns. All right, I'm going to try not to mute myself as I advance. All right, there we go. All right, so as you can see, this is a consultation map and project map that we have roughly in the city of Raleigh. You can see it's quite extensive. This program's been around since 2009 and has steadily advanced, especially in the last, I'd say 12 years, has steadily advanced in growth and popularity and has evolved over the years too. So we have supported over 1,200 consult requests from city residents since 2018 when we start tracking that statistic. 250 plus projects improved over the life of this program. The city has allocated around $3 million in investment as this cost share mechanism. And as we've grown with the program, we've increased our funding with great plans in the future to advance this even farther and grow our reach, our outreach methods, and in other ways here. So we also recently have approved a subsidy program to assist applicants who are low income or affordable housing or places of worship and nonprofits that serve that immediate community and own that property. And then even more recently, the city of Raleigh has been reaching out to third-party support for gap funding, voluntary project support, and incentives through their means and their abilities to reach the public and grow this program and finance. So some of these program elements, and this is just a high level checkbox basically to who is required or who is eligible and how these programs are successful. So an applicant, when they reach out and they hear about this program and want to participate, the first thing is they must be a part of the city of Raleigh. We do not support projects outside of the city of Raleigh and utilize public funds to reach those projects, which makes sense. In conjunction with that, property must be within city limits. It's not an independent do-it-yourself kind of thing. You do consult with city staff. We provide guidance documents. We provide our minimum design criteria. We support and help and lead those property owners in their steps to complete a successful project. And that is a requirement that we perform. We need eyes. Even if you're a top-end engineering firm who's participating in this program, you need to have a consult with our city staff. Part of some of these projects, we do our due diligence in making sure that these projects are going to succeed. And one of those ways is making sure, especially in Raleigh and the Piedmont, that water will actually infiltrate, and these are built correctly. So we do ask for basic infiltration testing when they submit their application. And I can get to more detail as we progress in different project types. We coordinate with city staff on project cost effectiveness, utilizing the state's SNAP tool to calculate that nitrogen and phosphorus values. And then once you install and complete that project, we verify that it is correct and good, and then we'll initiate a reimbursement. But part of that, before that even occurs, is the city enters a legal agreement with those property owners with a maintenance term, typically anywhere from 5 to normally 10 years, to make sure that that device that was built continues to be what it was intended to accomplish. All right, so the next 5 slides, I'm going to go into the various people who participate in this program and give examples of supported projects. So our most common, as you might assume, is the most common participant is residential property owners. So we support we have supported hundreds of rain gardens and cisterns and permeable pavement projects on private property at homeowners. And this is a very effective mechanism to reach private property that the city does not have access to, and put the burden of maintenance and construction on that property owner. It's very effective. So to the left photo, you see a really beautiful and typical example of kind of that smaller scale backyard rain garden. And then to the right, tying in downspouts from impervious surface right into a cistern that has a passive drawdown system. Another very common applicant that we work with is commercial properties. And so this is a great example. As you're entering downtown Raleigh from the south, you might even be familiar. This is a Longleaf Hotel, and they've worked with us. In this example, you have kind of your forward-facing, beautiful, expensive stainless steel cisterns that they use to beautify their project. And then from a water quality perspective, hidden from the back, you can see this bottom right photo, they have a series of cisterns that collect stormwater and really route that runoff from impervious surface and enter into the ground through passive drawdown. So very effective water treatment and water quality systems that also can benefit that property to beautify and kind of tell their story that they want to tell as far as green stormwater infrastructure, resilience, and their overall goals. All right, the next often common property owner we have that often deals with us is institutionals. What I mean by that is schools and universities, so they can also participate. Bottom left is a good example of an elementary school that's tying in education and outreach with their students and their teachers. And on the top right, we have a good example of a very large series of rain gardens at William Peace University. And I apologize that the fire department is responding behind me here. You can hear that. All right. Another good example too is that often facilitates some of our larger projects is places of worship that serve that community. So this is a good example of a church in the local downtown Raleigh area that has a series of rain gardens that they've utilized and also a cistern in kind of a prayer garden concept. So really neat, very effective, and adds value to that property. And lastly, we also facilitate within city property through this program. And here's some examples of permeable pavement at our Raleigh Union train station. Also a green roof. So very heavy construction, very expensive, and heavily engineered example. That's definitely a different scope and scale of, say, your backyard rain garden. And also to the bottom right, it's hard to tell, but that's a Silva-cell system. So basically an underground retention system with a series of ginkgo trees and a Silva-cell type. So, all right. So benefits to the city and community. There's a lot here, and I had to trim this down. So I apologize about the text, but check it out. So benefits to the city and community. It's about, you know, a hand in glove example of education and outreach direct to the community. So what do I mean by that? You know, staff, including myself and two other people, have direct conversations and relationships with that over 1,200 applicants who reach out to this program. And so during those consultations, we're not only selling the program, but speaking about not only the overall city goals and water quality goals to you know, to their reaching their specific needs and interests, and that could be quite diverse. You know, some of these people might be interested in managing a nuisance flooding issue, which is very common. Another instance is more from an ecological perspective. Maybe they're more in tune with you know, climate action and that sort of thing, and they want to address water quality concerns in their community. I mean, there's you know, another really common example is just how do I add, you know, landscaping value that's sustainable on my property where I can manage it more easily. So there's quite a unique range of applicants that come, and we have conversations with every single one. As I just touched on, a huge benefit is mitigation, not solving, but mitigation of nuisance flooding through stormwater management. It's a huge incentivization for private businesses and promotes GSI with contractors. We have great relationships with contractors that we've grown and built and educated through our guidance documents and just the overall processes that they have to go through to get a project approved through us. Continuing on, it's a direct pollutant loading reduction. So this really enters my job and my world through NPDES compliance that the city is required through their permit. So we point to this program in many different unique ways to kind of target some of our NPDES requirements and complement a lot of our existing programs, be that TMDL, education outreach, and other means and methods. Sole mechanism to incentivize GSI were not otherwise required on private property. What do I mean by that? So the city is very, very limited in the property that it owns, and so and it's very hard to access and build stormwater control measures or facilitate programs to meet water quality goals on private property. And so this mechanism is extremely effective, and it's been very successful to work with homeowners, utilize those utility funds in a very efficient manner and controlled manner as good stewards, and build stormwater, green stormwater infrastructure on private property. And once again, as I mentioned earlier, have those property owners be the sole maintenance, the maintenance of those devices. Through the life of this program, we become nationally recognized. So many different cities are contacting us, which I highly welcome anyone here to reach out to me, and we can set up meetings. But many different cities and organizations have been reaching out to try to shadow or learn about this program to see if they can implement it. And they're not necessarily large scale phase one type municipalities. Some of them are very small scale. All right, so track statistics. This is just a very few. As mentioned earlier, we've spent about $3.3 million in the city's cost share portion to date. What that's yielded, just from a pollutant loading perspective, is about 171 pounds per year of total nitrogen removed that we can point to not only as success, just from a water quality perspective, as that sort of indicator pollution of many different things, but also directly to some of our regional requirements like nutrient sensitive waters and NUS rules. And also more tangible benefit is that volume reduction that's entering into our storm system that might impact scouring and some of the receiving water issues that we've accrued and are dealing with. Per year, we're estimating about 1.45 or 1.5 million gallons per year removed just through infiltration through these devices. All right. So, depending on my time here, I'm just going to highlight some program or excuse me, some projects and show some pictures and describe them.
Yeah, I think we have plenty of time, Stephen. So go
Awesome.
ahead, please.
Great. I appreciate it. All right. So this next slide is kind of that typical and most common device supported through this program, that residential rain garden in action. This is just a time lapse. So you can see as that rain, it enters into that garden on the bottom left, fills, and within several hours, it's already infiltrating into the ground. Where otherwise, over the space of a year, that roughly 250 square foot rain garden that this project is, would be sending approximately 40,000 gallons of water through our storm system, especially in this Piedmont where our soils don't infiltrate very quickly, and putting huge loads and stressor on our receiving waters. Next project, this is kind of one of our highlights, I would say, with a commercial entity and a good partnership. This is off Capitol Boulevard, an old kind of area of town with a lot of impervious. And this property owner contracted with us to, as you can see on the left, it's got a lot of green sort of islands of infrastructure. That's just it's a large network and series of bioretention basins. Where previously this was just a gigantic asphalt lot that discharged to an impaired water body within Raleigh. And so they worked with us over the space of 2 different events or 2 different phases to not only build large-scale bioretention basins, but also small-scale kind of islands to intake that surface runoff, as well as in the backsides of their buildings, they now have installed a series of large cisterns that also take roof runoff. And this has drastically reduced volume and pollutant loading in that area, and especially to an impaired water body that's located in downtown Raleigh called Pigeon House Branch. And on top of this too, I would also note, through us, we have a series of signs. I don't have a picture of it, but we have a series of signs and educational, basically placards, that when people are going to this place and going to the brewery and sitting out on their patio, they have this education outreach, and it's very forward facing, the partnership that we have with them. It's been fantastic. This is another example, kind of that utility that commercial property owners can use to benefit their company. And so this company is a landscape company. It's called Leaf and Limb. There's more of a sustainable type landscape company where they promote and grow healthy trees, among other things. And so instead of using city water that has that chloramine and chlorine, and they now use a series of large cisterns to fill up their trucks that they use throughout the city and the region to maintain their investment in other property. So direct correlation and kind of a merging of their goals with our goals. And that's been another very successful relationship we've had. Here's an example of a green roof. We don't have a lot of examples of green roof because they're quite a bit more engineer required and they're expensive. But I wanted to highlight it as this is a city property located on the top of a large aquatic center. And it's a series of it had a sustainable approach, not only, through these solar panels, but also through that green roof concept. And it's been a success. All right. And that brings me to the end of it. I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nicole, I know the questions are going to be at the end here. But please, if there's any interest, or if you do work for a municipality, please do not hesitate to call or to reach out. I'm typically very receptive as best as I can, and I'd be happy to go into more detail about this program with you. So.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Yes, we are going to be doing all of the questions at the end, although as a couple folks have already demonstrated, please do put your questions if you either don't want to ask them on the mic, or if you just don't want to forget them, please put them in the chat as we go along, and we will get to all the questions that are being posted in the chat when we open up our Q&A at the end. So that was great. We really wanted, one of the reasons we asked Stephen to go first was because of the structure of the Raleigh Rewards Program. It provided a really great overview of what green infrastructure and nature-based solutions are that we're talking about here today. As you can see, they run the gamut of design and engineering practices that kind of pull natural features into the built environment. To address, in our case, since we're focused on, water impacts today, not only addressing water quality impacts, but also water quantity impacts. And as we just saw from Stephen's presentation, there's really a huge range of things you can incorporate, everything from, land conservation and planting trees to doing, restoration areas, to doing green roofs, permeable paving, addressing, parking areas and sidewalks like that. So we've really got, bioretention facilities. There's a lot of different things you can incorporate. And as you can see from just the photos, a lot of times these green infrastructure, nature-based solutions also incorporate a lot of other co-benefits. Planting trees can reduce heat island impacts in urban areas. You've got the beautification aspects of these projects. So thank you, Stephen, for providing that really great overview of what it means to do nature-based solutions in a public way like this, partnering with private partners. So next, we're going to be moving on to doing more of a kind of close look at one specific project. We've got Heather Fisher with us today. So Heather, if you want to go ahead and start sharing your screen while I introduce you, that would be great. Excuse me. So Heather has dedicated her career to advancing green stormwater infrastructure solutions and opportunities. She was a co-author for the Low Impact Development, a guidebook for North Carolina. And as a consultant, she served as a technical expert for EPA GSI technical assistance projects. For the town of Hillsborough, Ms. Fisher serves as a project manager for GSI retrofit projects. In addition to enforcing the town's post-construction stormwater standards, she has 25 years of experience in stormwater and natural resources management. So thank you so much, Heather, for joining us today, and I'm going to let you take it away.
Marlena, it's great to be here, and I'm excited to share a project. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you great. Thank you.
Great. So, yeah, I was saying that I'm very excited to share the green infrastructure that we have here in the town of Hillsborough. We are a small town. We are 10,000 in population, and being small, that means our stormwater division is also small. During this project, we had 2 staff members, and we've recently added a third. We are a small MS4, and so we do have a stormwater permit. And so that means that we have to do all the things that a larger MS4 would do. And that can be challenging. There also are some advantages to being a small town. We can have the freedom to be a little more hands-on with the developers and with organizations and community that we work with. And that definitely, you'll see that in this project. But in our stormwater division, as others, if you're on the call and you work in stormwater, we do get a lot of calls, drainage complaints or issues due to local flooding. And the story of this project starts out with a phone call from Habitat for Humanity. They were starting to redevelop this street on the outskirts of town, and they called us in to look at some flooding along the road. So we're out there with them taking a look at this, and we started to think, well, we know that the Public Works Department is already going to be regrading the ditches here and repaving as part of the redevelopment. So we had this realization of why don't we do something better here? And our division is passionate about green infrastructure and nature-based solutions to stormwater management. So this seemed like a perfect opportunity to implement those ideas. wanted to give you a little more background on the street and development itself. So as I said, it was on the outskirts of town, so not super urban, more like suburban rural setting. And it was developed in the 1970s as a mobile home development. And at this point, in mid 2010s, the homes were fairly run down and poorly maintained. And Habitat gradually bought out those properties, found the families other places to live. And then their plan was to redevelop the entire street. The Habitat was already looking at innovative solutions, so adding on green infrastructure was something that they were excited about. From the town's perspective, in addition to working on a community project with Habitat, we were also looking for stormwater retrofit projects. We are in the Falls Lake watershed. We're subject to the Falls Lake rules, and the existing development rules require us to invest a certain amount of money each year on retrofit projects that will reduce nutrients in our jurisdiction. This process was just getting started, and we were looking for opportunities. And the idea that we could invest some money into this project, find grant money, so we're leveraging our investment, and then we're providing benefits to our citizens here in the upper part of the watershed while complying with the falls rules and providing benefits downstream. So the ideas we came up with were to take a green street approach, but within the context of more of a suburban rural setting. And so the goal was to find opportunities for bioswales, grass swales with check dams, rain barrels, and native plant gardens. And these numbers are what we ended up accomplishing at the end. The project was very focused on bioswales. Bioswales are similar to bioretention cells. They're meant to fit within the road right of way. And the idea is that they are an alternative to stormwater conveyance, alternative to an underground pipe, to curb and gutter, to a ditch. So here you see maybe landscaping on the surface. It could be grass, it could be manicured landscaping, it could be native plants. And then underneath the surface is where all the stormwater management takes place. And it takes place with the plants and everything else. But what you don't see is the soil media that's specialized and it encourages infiltration. And then there's also an underdrain that carries off the excess water. And so these devices are conveying just like a ditch or a curb and gutter would, but they're also providing all these additional benefits. They're slowing the stormwater flows. They're reducing pollutants through various biological and chemical processes. They're recharging groundwater. And then here we have the community benefits of beautifying the neighborhood. Instead of a ditch, you have a flatter surface with a garden or grass. And then you're also seeing habitat benefits and other local ecosystem benefits. To give you an idea of how much storage these devices can provide, it's storage and it's also conveyance, but this is a picture during construction, and the trenches that they have to dig are very deep because you have all these layers of the media and the underdrain. So this is like the hard work that bioswale is doing underground, while all we see is the landscaped area. So how did we get this done? We had a great team of partners, and I'll give you a sense of each one of those. Piedmont Conservation Council led the grant seeking and grant administration, and we've worked with them in the past on projects that are nature-based. They are RC&D, a resource conservation and development organization. They work in 10 counties across the Piedmont of North Carolina. And they focus both on projects related to agriculture as well as restoration in either urban or rural areas. And stormwater and green infrastructure fit in within what they do. Habitat was an amazing partner. Since we have a little more time, I'll just make sure everyone understands who Habitat is. I'm sure you've heard of them, but who they are and how they've evolved is very interesting. They provide adequate, affordable housing to underserved individuals and families. The people they serve are home buyers. So in order to buy a house, they perform sweat equity. They have to provide volunteer hours in order to earn that sweat equity. And then they also are required to make home payments. So Habitat funds the home building through donations, grants, and volunteer labor. And in our county, Orange County, they've been working there for 35 years. They've built 300 homes, and they built 25 homes along Odie Street. So Habitat has built an extensive volunteer network. And so here we are, we're walking into a situation where someone can just call up volunteers for a volunteer work day. And that was a huge benefit for us. We also used the benefit of their staff who are dedicated to community engagement. So they already have a system process for engaging with the residents and the future home buyers. And we just needed to plug into that process and provide the information that they could use to communicate. On a different angle, they have incredible construction resources. They have knowledgeable staff. They have vacant lots where materials can be staged or equipment can be staged. And they also have tools and materials that would support volunteer work days. Finally, we felt it was going to be very important to have a local partner. And Odie Street is part of a larger underserved community known as the Fairview community. And they have an organization called the Fairview Community Watch. And we did ask them to provide a letter of support and promise a small amount of in-kind match. Really, it was just meeting space and help with communication. So then the challenge was finding the funding, right? And we had some advantages. We were proposing a nature-based solution. And I do find that as we look at grant opportunities, having a nature-based solution does provide more advantages. It helps a project stand out in many ways. So that was an advantage, but then we were intimidated by the process because we were up here in the upper part of the Neuse River watershed, and even in the upper parts of our local Bellevue Branch watershed. And we felt like we really needed to stand out in terms of how are we going to benefit downstream, how are we going to benefit larger areas and even statewide. And it was just hard to imagine how as a small project, how are we going to stand out with the competition? But we pulled out all the stops, and we both showed that it was going to be a very strong project locally. And then we also proposed to provide education and promotion of these practices. So our proposal was for community-driven design. And the idea was that we would achieve the acceptance of the project and the long-term stewardship by engaging with the residents from the beginning, making sure they understood the project and making sure they were invested in it. And then that we're identifying benefits directly for the community. So it's like, how do you know something's going to benefit a community? Well, it's best to talk to them directly. Say, what do you value? What are you looking for? And then the idea was to also provide education and promotion of the practices to a wider audience. And so in proposing that, we did achieve funding through the North Carolina Environmental Enhancement Grant Program, and then supplemental funding from PCC's RC&D allocation. With that, we brought on KCI for the design and Backwater for the construction, and then we had a local consultant who provided education and led some of the education events. I'm going to jump right into all the different outreach materials we used and the events. We did have a need for translation Several of the residents spoke Spanish, and we also had a good number of residents who spoke Korean, which is a language from Myanmar, Burma. And Habitat was already set up, thankfully, to provide translators and to help with translation of the printed materials. So this is just an example of some of the materials we use to begin the process of explaining what are we doing here on Odie Street. We held 2 design workshops, which were meant to interact with the future residents, educate them what we were doing and why, and then gather feedback. And for some of these, we had to deal with some cold weather because it was during the later stages of the pandemic, and we weren't quite ready to all meet indoors yet. But we had a good turnout, and here we have the Korean translator and KCI, Jason Dahl from KCI, presenting. And one of the details that we asked for feedback was the look of the weir walls. The weir walls are going to be holding in the soil media. And so we gained feedback from the residents of the type of look. We ended up using stamped concrete for that. Now on to construction. Construction occurred while Habitat was still finishing some of the homes. We waited until they were at that stage because, as some of you probably know, bioswales can get easily clogged by sediment, and we needed to be able to control the sediment runoff from construction. And this is showing one of the bioswales before the mulch was laid and the plants were planted. So hopefully you can see the gray is the specialized soil media. And then as soon as we got that stage, we started education events that were also volunteer work days. And that's how we planted the bioswales and also the native plant gardens. This is one of our education consultants, Diana Montgomery. So all the bioswales were planted by volunteers. And in fact, this photo shows one of the homeowners who has a bioswale in his front yard. Another education event. And then in order to outreach to that wider audience, we held a tour and networking event. And here we were targeting professionals from affordable housing, as well as the stormwater management and environmental fields. We had a great turnout for this. It was a lot of fun. And the hope was that what we can provide in terms of lessons learned and process, this could make it easier for others to take on a similar project or come up with something even better. And lastly, for the wider audience piece, we released a promotional video actually this fall. It tells the whole story. It's about 11 minutes long. And this one, where our hope is it just can be widely shared and provide a resource. This is on YouTube, so I encourage you to check it out. So all of these events and this interaction with the local community, the idea was to build this strong foundation of understanding and knowledge, of value to the project that we've put in place. And then the idea is that we're going to use that foundation to start off the maintenance and to maintain these practices for the long term. So the homeowners are expected, for the most part, to maintain the vegetation in the bioswales. The idea is that all throughout town, if you front a public road right-of-way, you're responsible for maintaining the vegetation. And we made that clear from the beginning of the project and explained that concept. However, we don't want to just walk away. And we also want to support those homeowners who want to have the native plants in front of their houses, because they did have a choice. They could have had sod, which is just a completely different maintenance scenario. But we did have several homeowners who are interested in the native plants and mulch. And so the plan is to provide them support at least annually with mulch deliveries and a volunteer workday for weeding and replacing plants if needed. And so that's something that we're starting to do. We'll have our second workday in April this year. And so from this gravel road that was flooding, we were able to be a part of the transformation of this neighborhood. And it was just a great process to be a part of. And then we were able to improve the look of the neighborhood along the road by transforming these ditches to bioswales, treatment swales, and then even provide some enhanced landscaping on the neighborhood lots. And in addition, the rain barrels, and then Habitat also had other innovative green technologies, including solar panels on the houses if the homeowners requested that. So I hope this tells a story of what can be done in other places, and I appreciate everyone's time. And we'll look forward to the question and answer session.
Great, thank you so much, Heather. We really appreciate you presenting this project to us today. We will, just to remind everyone, if you came in late, we're holding questions until the end, and we're going to have all the presenters, excuse me, do a Q&A at the end. We have one more presenter for you. So Heather, I think you're still sharing your screen, and we're going to move over to having Terry share her screen. So one thing that I just wanted to highlight as we're transitioning, one of the things that we really appreciated in Heather's presentation, doing this kind of deep dive into a project, is that it highlights sort of all the steps that you have to go through for a project. But one thing that I thought about was I was able to sit in on our North Carolina Emergency Management BRIC program, early rounds of kind of review of the projects that came in. And for those of you that don't know, the BRIC program is Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities. It's a FEMA program, and it's a competitive grant program that all the states compete in. And one thing that we noticed was that projects that actually incorporated green infrastructure measures into projects that were also, sort of traditional gray infrastructure are likely to get funded, than ones that maybe would have been a less expensive project, but only included the sort of traditional gray infrastructure. So I think that's something that's really important to think of, is it may come out that your project in the end is more expensive if you're incorporating these green building measures, but you also might be more likely to get funding from a funder who's really interested in projects that either combine gray and green infrastructure, or ones like this where you've really got the focus on the nature-based solutions. So Terry, are you able to start sharing your screen while I introduce you?
I thought I was. Am I not?
So right now we're seeing you. We are not sharing your screen yet.
Okay.
I'll let you do that while I introduce you. And then if there's still a problem, Nicole and I can help you troubleshoot that. So Terry DeMayo is the Director of Development for the USS North Carolina Battleship Memorial. She has extensive experience in environmental sciences, policy, and funding. As the Director of Development, she is responsible for capital campaigns and grant writing, as well as donor and grant management. Her background in sciences, planning, and landscape design have influenced her success in advancing the battleship's Living with Water project and developing its educational, public outreach, and scientific monitoring programs. Ms. DeMayo has held previous positions as Finance Director of for the Colorado State Attorney General, Principal of TD King Consultants, Policy Advisor for Georgia State Governor, Executive Director of the Chattahoochee Hill Country Alliance, and Environmental Policy Manager with the Carl Vinson Institute of Government at the University of Georgia. So we are very happy to have Terry DeMayo here, and she's presenting on the Living with Water program at the Battleship North Carolina, and we are seeing your screen. So I will let you take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlena. Really appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. The Battleship Memorial is a National Historic Landmark and a state historic site. We host about 250,000 visitors a year, and we are administratively attached to the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources at the state level. So the battleship's located about 28 miles upstream of the Atlantic Ocean. We are exactly on the opposite end of the previous two presenters at the top of the river basins. We're here at the bottom. The battleship is berthed in the upper reaches of the Cape Fear River estuary at the confluence of the northeast Cape Fear River and the Cape Fear River, which travels northwest of us, really all the way to the Raleigh area. And we sit within a coastal marshland ecosystem on Eagles Island. So the Living with Water project was identified in about 2015 when leadership began to notice more frequent and more severe tidal flooding, which is what you're seeing here in this photo. This is our parking lot. And we were experiencing this tidal flooding even on sunny days. The flooding is a problem because the ship is an enterprise of the state. And what that means is that by statute, the ship receives no annual state appropriations. Hold on a second, my PowerPoint presentation is getting away from me. We must pay all of our operations and maintenance by visitor receipts, gift shop sales, events, and rentals. So this is some of images of some of the impacts to our site. This is our only access road, which frequently would sheet flood. Our parking lot, which I think this image speaks for itself, and access to our visitor center, which really also kind of speaks to our for itself. So the tidal flooding really was endangering public safety and threatening our livelihood. Tidal flooding also interrupts our operations and damages our grounds, like killing our 70-year-old live oak trees from saltwater inundations. In 2017, we asked the Army Corps of Engineers to conduct a hydrology and hydraulics review of our site. And even with the results of that recommendations, the leadership decided to move away from the hardscape of dikes and hardened channels and catchments, but instead selected some nature-based options in discussion with NOAA. So in 2018, NOAA and COS began additional field investigations and data collection, which helped inform the Living with Water concept design and engineering. NOAA's salinity sensors confirmed that tides, not stormwater or precipitation, was causing our site flooding. And NOAA's water level recorders confirmed that observed tides recorded at the National Weather Service gauge at the foot of the Cape Fear Memorial Bridge, and you can see the superstructure of the Memorial Bridge at the top end of the arrow there. But what they discovered is that the tides recorded at that gauge exactly matched the tide levels at the ship. So about this time in 2018, 2019, I was speaking to a lot of community groups and applying for grants for our tidal flooding issues. And I found that the flooding images didn't really grab my audiences. So I became curious and I started thinking, was our flooding really worsening? And using the tidal record at the downstream gauge and the National Weather Service's definition of a flooding event as tides that are 5.5 and greater, I developed a trend analysis and found that tidal flooding frequency was in fact worsening. You can see from this historic trend analysis that the number of flooding events remained fairly stable from the 1940s through the aughts. And then looking at the last full decade, it shows that nearly 1/2 of the days in the year 2020, our site was flooded. of course, forcing visitors to drive, park, and walk through Tidewater just to enter the visitor center. So the Living with Water project was implemented through a $6 million and some change funding package. I put together a package of grants, 4 main grants. The Department of Natural and Cultural Resources contributed some repair and renovation funding. We received a direct appropriation from the state. The Battleship Commission committed funds out of their reserves, and we also collected donations from individuals. The Living with Water kickoff meeting was in December 2020. The construction began in February 24, along with our groundbreaking event. We had about 55 stakeholders and supporters attended the groundbreaking event, including state and local elected officials and representatives of all of our funders. We also had a King Tide event that showed up for the first day of construction and for our groundbreaking. So literally, that's what construction looked like on the first day there. So the Living with Water project is still in construction, but it has 5 main elements: a living shoreline and shoreline restoration, a wetland and tidal creek restoration, and parking lot improvements, including the bioswale that you see bisecting our parking. And the bioswale, of course, is to manage the stormwater runoff from the parking lot. So this is what our site looked like prior to construction. You can see the area at the top of the screen, the area of our parking lot that has all of the live oak trees are dead and was perpetually flooded. So what we have done is we have restored about 800 linear feet of living shoreline, and some down here as well, and as well around our tidal creek. We have removed about 2 acres of impervious parking and restored that area with a wetland and tidal creek habitat. And we're in the process of elevating the remaining parking lot area above the usual tidal flooding level, including completing the bioswale that's running down the middle of it. Because we needed to remain open during construction, we have divided our parking lot construction into 2 phases. So the first phase was the one closest to the wetland area, and that is now open and receiving parked visitors and staff vehicles. And we're now working on this piece here. So the 4th project element is our multi-year project monitoring with UNCW and NOAA NCOS. This is contributing to an academic and agency knowledge base of the resiliency benefits of green infrastructure and nature-based solutions. As well, we have project photos that are taken twice a month, and that's creating a visual public record to accompany the monitoring. And then the 5th element of Living with Water is education and outreach. And this includes our interactive GIS-based story map, which is accessible on our website. Living with Water was also featured on an episode of the Waterloop podcast. So that's been out there on the podcast airways. For the 5th year, we're hosting the junior and senior high coastal physics and engineering students from the Cape Fear Academy. We're doing that tomorrow. And then we're also in the early stages of creating a living laboratory at the battleship site in collaboration with UNCW and the North Carolina Sea Grant to support rigorous scientific research and provide opportunities for place-based learning beyond the Living with Water project. So this living laboratory is intended to grow and maintain in place and grow over time into the future. So some of the results of our $6 million investment include great media interest and coverage, such as the Washington Post article that went worldwide on their digital newspaper, and PBS's State of Change segment that's expected to air this May. As well, we've hosted many site tours. As I mentioned, NOAA's Southeast Restoration Center is a project funder. This latest visit from them is the third time that they've highlighted living with water in the Southeast US and as well as nationwide. Also, the Battleship will act as the Southeast and Caribbean Disaster and Resilience Partnership Conference field trip site. We expect about 100 visitors will learn about the area's cultural and natural history, living with water engineering and restoration, living with water monitoring, and the future vision for Eagles Island. So some of the good news lessons is that animals love green infrastructure. Within days, fish and bird began using the living shoreline and wetland habitats. As well, tidal floods are held by the wetland and flooding impacts have been reduced. And our monitoring photography program have created a rich project legacy. And finally, Living with Water, as I mentioned, has enjoyed fantastic media coverage and project interest. So the nature-based solutions really offer hope. So some of our not so good lessons is that our permitting process seemed really long and contentious. We found that regulators didn't seem as comfortable permitting nature-based green infrastructure than they did permitting bulkheads and docks down here on the coast. As well, the construction was not permitted in the living shoreline or wetland areas during the moratorium, April 1 to September 30, in order to protect juvenile fisheries. We did receive a moratorium relief in late August and were able to plant marsh plants in early September, but this was followed by a really rough autumn of heavy rains and many king tide events. So our marsh plants look a little rough these days. As well, our permit requires 90% survivability and replacement of our marsh plants for the next 3 years, which is what I understand to be a very high percent of survivability for recently installed native plants. And we've had a lot of discussion around our Phragmites prohibitions. All excavated soil material could not be used on site. It had to be removed and disposed of. And all new soil had to be verified free of plant, root, and seed stock. No more than 5% of Phragmites covered is allowed to intrude into the new habitats for the next 3 years. This is particularly difficult to achieve and maintain, given Phragmites is a real aggressive and invasive species. So I had one other, try to get through this. One other set of takeaways. Yeah, not all green infrastructure is the same. There's a really big difference we have found between habitat restoration and flood reduction and stormwater management solutions. So I would encourage other areas and local governments and communities to be sure you're on the same page with your design and engineering firm regarding your project needs and goals. So remember, to circle back, NOAA's early field investigations back in 2018 discovered that tides, not rain, was causing our flooding issues, but we have ended up spending more time and money constructing stormwater solutions than our nature-based and tidal flooding infrastructure. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Terry. We really appreciate you taking the time to go over that project with us and the ongoing project. Actually, it looks like you're still in the construction phase. So we have some questions that have come up in our chat, and we're going to move into our general open Q&A session now. And I'm going to ask if folks are able, when you ask a question, to turn on your video, then that would be great. If not, No worries. I know we're all in different places. But we had a question from Meredith Horvis that was posted in the chat. Meredith, I'm not sure if you wanted to just go ahead and unmute yourself. Your question was for Stephen. If not, I can go ahead and read it out.
Hi, yes, I'm going to have my camera off. I am at UNC Wilmington. I'm an assistant professor. Apologize, I am actually walking across campus. Thank you to all the presenters. Super interesting work. Yeah, my question was for Stephen, the first presentation. A lot of research highlights green infrastructure implementation leading to gentrification or displacement of residents. I'm not sure, maybe you've read some of this research, but my question is, have you all seen this happening, or is there a way maybe to mitigate these efforts that you all are doing in this city? Maybe it's too early to tell. So just a question around any kind of green gentrification, as it's kind of called in the literature, and because of the implementation of these projects. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Meredith. I could certainly attempt to answer that. So to your first point, no, I'm not familiar with that study or those studies. So I can't kind of speak to that. But I do know that there are multiple departments within the city of Raleigh that take that topic pretty seriously, and they do a lot of research, including checking and even to the point of auditing, which we went through with this program. The rainwater rewards to address multiple things, including that. Now we have attempted to answer that question because it can be a very difficult thing to track. Number one, from my experience, gentrification in general, but through a stormwater lens, we've attempted to mitigate it. To your point, and one of the things I like to describe first and foremost is that, especially in relation to the lens through this program, it's community benefit, number one. And even though a project might be located on one, property within an area or a couple properties within an area, that stormwater benefit is a community issue. It affects those downstream, especially, or directly adjacent. And so, so tracing it and or linking it to gentrification can be quite a challenge. And in most cases, it's very mutually beneficial. So we don't see that, or we don't necessarily correlate it with like a greening or stormwater infrastructure, however you define that, or how that study defined it. Well, so in kind of a preemptive look, because the questions have come up with the managers of this program, how do we reach those sort of disproportionately impacted communities, of which might be more susceptible to something like gentrification and other issues. We have piloted a 100% funding program, for example, that's been somewhat successful, where, say you're at 75% funding and you need that additional 25%. And then because of that lack or because of that financial requirement, someone might not come and proceed through the program. We have a mechanism to fund that additional 25%. So people aren't turned away from the program. But we found even that's a challenge. And a lot of that is because of sort of stopgap funding or the need to manage contractors yourself and provide that upfront cost, because we're not going to reimburse a program or a project until it's complete. And so, and we verify that it's what we agreed upon. And so we are working currently and nearly almost complete with a third party to provide that stopgap funding, provide project management support with third-party professionals, bereft of like a recommendation from the city, but they have their own incentive to participate. But it fills that sort of need that's come up where a community or a property owner or someone who's a little more disproportionately impacted than someone else for a variety of reasons can participate in this program to the benefit of them and their property, also mutually in the community. So I know that was a really long answer. It's a difficult topic, and I appreciate your interest in it. And I guess to the last point is we have not observed it, but we are paying attention to it, and perhaps it's something that manifests itself, 10 years from now. I'm not too sure. Raleigh in general is in North Carolina in general is changing for many reasons, and just to be a little candid, I think stormwater is kind of on the bottom of a lot of this list. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know I gave you a tough question and about 3 questions in 1 question. So that's great. Thank you so much, Stephen.
No, it's my pleasure.
Thank you, Meredith and Stephen. I actually want to give Heather a chance to respond to that as well. I know that Hillsborough is kind of on, the other end of the spectrum of city size for us in North Carolina. So I'd be curious, Heather, if you had any thoughts on this question about, the gentrification that can follow these kind of, really, I think it happens with a lot of different types of beautification and projects in cities.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's something that's on my mind a lot. Town of Hillsborough, it's a little bit of a strange situation in that there are parts that are very old, there are parts that are developing very fast, and then there's the Fairview community, which is kind of tucked into a corner and has been there for a long time. And I would say they're not really gentrifying at all, and it's probably because they're so kind of on the other side of town and on the other side of where the development pressures are at the time. But I feel like it's definitely an important trend to watch. There are complex issues even with habitat going in. They did displace people. They did their best to do it in a very humane and collaborative way. And actually, there are residents who stayed on the street because they wanted to stay. So I'm glad that we were able to work closely with the partners. And, when you can do that, I believe it does help with making sure that the project is going to benefit the community and provide uplift that benefits the people living there.
Thank you, Heather. Appreciate your response. The next question actually is also for you. Matt Shelley posted this in the chat, and he also posted that he had to step away, but he was hoping that you could still answer it, and he's planning on watching the video later. So he asked for some more numbers about the Hillsborough project, the overall cost, how much grant funding you received, how much city funding, and how much private funding there was for the project.
Sure. Well, I'm putting in the chat a list of roughly what the funding and the costs were, and the success story for this project in the Resilient Toolkit does have a breakdown of the costs as well. Sometimes you'll see that we add in the NC State monitoring, which I didn't really get to mention, but there's another grant that was for that because they're monitoring our bioswales. But this is just for design, construction, and the outreach and education. And so it just gives you a sense of how much the cash funding was. Town cash match was $30,000, additional in kind $25,000, and then the design, construction, and all the education events. We had 5, so that's why it's such a large number, but it was definitely worth it.
Thank you very much, Heather. So we had a question for Terry about the Battleship project that came in the chat from Warren Darrell, pardon me, Warren Darrell. Warren, did you want to unmute yourself and just ask this question, or would you like me to read it? I can, if you stay silent, I'll read it. All right, I will go ahead and read it. So Warren was interested in asking if you knew how much additional sea level rise would be overwhelming the gains you'd made. And I assume that question is also one about timing, because we know that we are going to have additional sea level rise. So some of this is just sort of, I think, a life of the project question.
Right. Thank you, Warren, for your question. It's interesting, right? And it gets to an interesting point about these projects in terms of trade-offs, as I guess all of the speakers have been addressing in the questions that have come from our listeners. So NOAA's models pretty clearly show that that we can expect a great deal more water in the 30s up to 2050, right? I think that for our project, that we would, if we or when we see an additional 24 to 30 inches or so, that it would begin to overwhelm our project gains. So a huge ironic rub here that I have to put a plug in is that Phragmites, which I went on about, is a terrible plant that's an invasive species, and it's basically everywhere. And partly why is because it's very aggressive. It's very aggressive in its root system. But one of the things that we're beginning to see is that those roots capture silt and actually accrete new ground. And so I can tell you that I've been at the battleship about 5.5 years, and over that period of time, I have seen between 4 to 8 inches of new soil be built up or captured and retained in the Phragmites root system. So, you never know, right? What nature may do to withstand some of the other forces that are going on as well.
Thank you, Terry. So I just want to encourage folks, that was all the questions that we had in the chat. If you would like to either post more questions in the chat, please do so, or go ahead and raise your hand. There should be a little button at the bottom of your screens, and it's got a hand symbol. If you want to hit that, then we can also call on you and you can ask your question verbally. But one of the questions that I had, if we're listening to all the speakers, was, I think there are kind of the obvious public benefits that we hope to see when we, as a government entity, build a project like this. But I'm wondering if there were any co-benefits now that you've got your projects built, or at least largely constructed and are underway, if there's any co-benefits that you didn't anticipate it, or that ended up being greater than what you thought they would be when you started the project. And Terry, maybe I'll just start with you, because you had that interesting point about the Phragmites, which isn't really a co-benefit, but it's kind of a surprising outcome.
Yeah, it may end up being a co-benefit. We don't know. I think that what surprised me was how quickly the habitats filled with life. I mean, really, it was within a couple days of that restored habitats beginning to be populated by birds, which were the obvious species, but the birds were there for the fish. So, they were captured right away. I think some of the other co-benefits was really the level of interest people have had about the project. And I think that, the term or the name of the project is kind of catchy, but really what we are attempting to do is figure out ways to live with water. And that's such a different approach than a hardscape kind of a piece. I will speak to a different question while I have the microphone, since my co-presenters have both highlighted stormwater projects, and my project alluded to the stormwater piece of our project being very difficult. And although no one's asked me why that was, part of it is, and I think that this is part of the message that I was trying to really emphasize about knowing your project goals and knowing your habitat, knowing what you're working within, because our site is part of the marshland ecosystem. We are literally sitting on top of historic land practices that were started in the 1700s to capture use of that landscape. And part of what they did, apparently, or what we now know, is they cut down all of the trees, which probably were cypress and cedar. And they took the crown of the trees and mashed it all together into, matting, and laid it down in the muck in between the tree stumps. And then they milled the trunk of the tree into planks and laid that down on the tree stumps as well. And then they filled on top of that. And then when the battleship came in the early 60s, we of course filled on top of what had became our parking lot area. And in between, there was a whole lot of industry that occurred there on the site, the maritime industries with tar and pitch and et cetera. So when we started to construct our bioswale, the notion was to, as Heather indicated, you have to dig a trench, and it's a relatively deep trench, and it immediately ran into all of that historic debris, which never biodegraded because it's in a water ecosystem down there, and created washouts and other things like that, and created a foundation that was very unstable. And so has been very much more complicated to deal with in the construction process than constructing a wetland habitat or a living shoreline habitat has been. So.
Thank you so much for addressing that. I actually had it on my list of questions I was going to ask you, because you kept alluding that it was a lot of time spent on stormwater. So thank you for addressing it. That's fascinating. And just also points to, how long these places have been built up and inhabited, many of them, and how, you can run into these sort of unexpected parts of our physical environment or unexpected consequences of the work that has been done in the past. So thank you. Stephen, actually, I want to give folks, Heather and Stephen, a chance to respond to my earlier question just about sort of unexpected co-benefits. And then I see we have another question in the chat we'll move on to after that. But Heather or Stephen, if you have anything you'd want to add about the co-benefits question.
I had a quick one that came to mind, just that the Odie Street is just right on the outskirts of town, and they could have just built the houses and then just people go to work, come back, and don't interact. But I do see that our involvement, at least helping to encourage both the setup of an HOA as well as the residents participating in the larger community.
Thank you. Stephen, did you have anything you wanted to add? And then actually the next question in the chat is for you also, if you want to segue into that one.
Yeah, I see that question. Yeah, as far as co-benefits, I mean, there's a lot that occur, especially because the Rainwater Rewards program it's popular, which has grown. You can point to so many different requirements, compliance requirements, but really it's I would say most of it revolves around the relationship and unique relationship that the city has with its citizens in this cost share sort of relationship and education outreach relationship. So much of those relationships that we built, be it a commercial property owner to community organizations to your neighborhood, groups, whatever it is, has led to a lot of unique opportunities to speak, to present, and to build, and address kind of local concerns. So it's a growing program with a lot of different stakeholders and people really interested. So I know that's kind of some of the goal of it from the beginning. Not to say so much co-benefit, but it's pretty neat how it's grown and continues to evolve. And then I guess to Julia's question too, she asked if do we have metrics on cost size of bioretention, rain gardens, that sort of thing. And so yes, we track a lot of different metrics, not only for just internal tracking and due diligence and check to see, okay, is this particular project cost effective or not? And usually we approach that through a kind of an estimated pollutant removal rate Usually we use nitrogen versus a total cost. We get a metric and we compare every single project type with its other project types. And so we can develop, and we have developed, program caps saying, hey, if they're exceeding this price range for this amount of nitrogen removed, then it's showing that, they could be trying to take advantage of the city, or it's just not a very cost-effective method, that sort of thing. But I think maybe to even more specifically Julia's point, the range of costs for a particular size, say like a 250 square foot rain garden, which is kind of typical for your single residence homes, it ranges, and it's changed a lot with inflation. So back in the day, maybe $6,000 total cost was very, very reasonable. Now we're seeing numbers in that range from 10,000 to 15,000 or more. And there are questions and internal conversations that our management's been having on how do we manage that? How do we steward that cost? And like I hinted before, or talked about before, we do have due diligence requirements. We do have sort of program price control caps that we have been implemented through our policy. So, but I can't really specifically answer the question because it's a lot. It's a range. So hopefully that answers.
All right. Well, thank you, Stephen. Well, I just wanted to ask before I kind of wrap things up, we're getting close on time, if either Heather or Terry or you had anything that you wanted to address that we didn't get a chance to, or that nobody asked you about. If there's anything you'd like to jump in and say the final comment.
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak again. I mean, I appreciate the opportunity, number one, to present and to highlight. And like I just messaged Julia, there's a lot of detail that I'm not getting into. So please don't hesitate to reach out through email or whatever. And I'd be happy to respond. And really enjoyed, especially Terry's technical responses. Awesome. So thank you.
I also appreciate the opportunity to share our project. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
I enjoyed listening to both Terry and Stephen's presentations, and just we're just on the early stages of looking at a rainbow program, so it's just nice to see something to shoot for. It's very inspiring.
Yeah, well, thank you all so much for joining us. We really wanted to specifically today highlight public projects. I know a lot of the folks who are sitting in on the webinar today are from local governments and state government. And we wanted to be able to show that, these kind of projects not only can have the direct benefit of, improving water quality, reducing stormwater runoff, creating, more beautiful spaces, public spaces, as well as private spaces, but that they also serve as a real way to educate the public, because they are public projects, a lot of them, they're public programs. It really can, enhance our community's understanding of the benefits of these kind of projects, and also just understanding of how hydrology works and how our water flows operate. So I think that I really appreciate all of you taking the time to be with us today, both the speakers and also our participating audience. I just wanted to let you know that, as we mentioned before, the Spotlight on Resilience webinars are a series, and our next Spotlight on Resilience will be on Thursday, March 13th, and we will be focusing on understanding climate data. So Nicole is putting a registration link for that webinar. I think she just dropped it into the chat, and we'll have more details on, presenters in the agenda coming soon. We are also going to be hosting a webinar in June, Friday, June 6th, on preparing for the heat season. So as you may know, we've got a heat action plan toolkit up on our website that helps you, local governments specifically, walk through planning for heat events, but we're going to be having a webinar focused entirely on that on June 6th. And then finally, let me share my screen. If you don't get it already, let's see, where do I want to do this? There we go. Please sign up for our Spotlight on Resilience newsletter. And hopefully I am sharing it now. We've got a QR code there. You can also find a link to it on our NCORE Resilience homepage. And we'll be sending out, we have been sending out for, I want to say 5 or 6 months now, monthly updates from our office and our partners across the state and in local governments about all things resilience. Since I know that a lot of folks from local government are on this call today, if you've got projects that you'd like us to highlight in our newsletter, please always send them on to us. And Nicole's correcting me that we've actually been doing monthly newsletters now for 9 months. And she also dropped the link to sign up for the newsletter in the chat. So please do sign up for that. It's a great way to find out about funding opportunities, other projects that are occurring, webinars such as this, but other ones held by other entities. And we really try to cover resilience very, very broadly, not just around flooding and water issues, but also high heat, drought, wildfires, all kinds of things. So please do join us there. And thank you so much for joining us here today. We really appreciate it.